The Jeff Chandler mystery is finally solved, and the truth is far darker than the sanitized story that has persisted for decades. For years, Chandler was remembered as the silver-haired, deep-voiced actor who brought Cochise to life in Broken Arrow and starred in a plethora of westerns and war films throughout the 1950s. His death at age 42 in 1961 was long described as a tragic but simple medical complication, a routine back surgery gone wrong. However, this conceals the far more disturbing reality of Universal Pictures and Hollywood power brokers who worked diligently to keep hidden from the public. The reason behind Jeff Chandler's premature death encompasses a complex web of medical negligence, studio exploitation, personal secrets, and institutional cover-ups, all of which conspire to profoundly redefine one's understanding of this Hollywood star's final chapter. What emerges is not some minor correction of history, but a reframing of a death that never should have happened and of the dark forces that circled the wagons to hide the truth. Not only does the real story of his final days reveal a medical tragedy, but it is, even more importantly, a scathing indictment of a Hollywood system that used its stars until they broke, then quietly disposed of the evidence. The official version of Jeff Chandler's death, a simple complication from routine back surgery, has never explained how a physically robust 42-year-old could die from what should have been a standard procedure. This version falls apart under scrutiny, revealing a pattern of negligence, cover-ups, and studio politics that contributed to his premature death. To fully understand what happened, we must examine 5 critical aspects of his final days, elements deliberately obscured for decades that together solve the mystery of how one of Hollywood's most reliable leading men could vanish so suddenly and why the full truth was never told. Compared to other surgeries, it was a routine procedure. However, it was far from routine. At the beginning of 1961, Chandler found himself standing at a crossroads in his career. At 42, the silver-haired star had established a solid reputation as one of Hollywood's most dependable leading men, particularly within westerns and war films. His imposing 6 feet 4 inches frame and deep resonant voice made him a natural fit for authority figures and military leaders. Although he was never able to attain the superstar status enjoyed by peers like Gregory Peck or Burt Lancaster, Chandler was a reliable box office draw for Universal Pictures, appearing in a steady stream of profitable, if not necessarily prestigious, productions. What fans never knew was that years of physically demanding roles had taken their significant toll on his back. He suffered from chronic pain because of a herniated disc, likely the cumulative result of stunts, action sequences, and grueling studio production schedules. By spring 1961, Chandler's condition had worsened to the point that surgery was required. When he went into Culver City Hospital for the operation in May, his management and the studio described it publicly as a routine procedure, a minor inconvenience before he could get back to filming. This was in keeping with Hollywood's long-standing rule of minimizing health problems affecting one of its valuable stars in order to protect their publicity image and investment in films. That surgery happened on May 13, 1961, and what ensued contradicted every part of the routine storyline. Hours after surgery, Chandler started to hemorrhage heavily internally and went into shock. Emergency interventions were started, but the bleeding proved difficult to stem, marking the beginning of a medical crisis that would last for days. One nurse who witnessed the events afterwards spoke about the contrast between the public narrative and real-life threat on Chandler's life, only on condition of anonymity. As Chandler's condition continued to deteriorate, physicians conducted several follow-up surgeries in desperate attempts to find and stem the hemorrhaging. These subsequent operations, far from the single procedure described to the public, put an enormous amount of stress on his system and further complicated things with clots and infections. The medical professionals never made public the actual cause of the bleeding at that time, but the autopsy later revealed a surprising surgical mistake. In performing the initial back operation, the surgeon nicked a major artery. That critical mistake, instead of an unavoidable complication, was the direct cause of the medical crisis that beset Chandler. For almost 3 weeks, Chandler battled for his life, receiving multiple blood transfusions and undergoing several surgeries. While studio publicity continuously issued upbeat statements about his condition, referring to his setbacks as minor and assuring his fans that he was soon to recover. This was in direct contrast to the grim reality of the deterioration in Chandler's state, a situation that was deliberately being kept under wraps to protect both the reputation of the hospital and the interests of the studio. On June 17, 1961, after 36 days of what had been described as routine treatment, Jeff Chandler died from complications related to massive internal bleeding triggered by his initial surgery. He was 42 years old, in what should have been the prime of his life and career. The official cause of death was listed as blood poisoning due to circulatory complications, a technically accurate but deliberately vague description that obscured the surgical error at the root of the tragedy. This carefully worded explanation maintained the narrative that Chandler's death, while tragic, resulted from unavoidable medical complications rather than negligence. This misrepresentation has shaped public understanding of his death for decades. The routine surgery gone wrong story persists in biographies, film histories, and cultural memory, concealing the disturbing reality that one of Hollywood's most physically commanding leading men essentially bled to death due to a preventable surgical mistake. In the wake of Jeff Chandler's shocking death, his family initiated a legal action that contested the public narrative of an unavoidable medical tragedy. Chandler's ex-wife, Marjorie, who was on good terms with him and who continued to be the mother of his two daughters, filed a malpractice action against Dr. Julian Hoffman, the surgeon who conducted the fatal operation, and against Culver City Hospital, where the procedure had been performed. The complaint forthrightly alleged negligence in the course of the surgery, specifically averring that Dr. Hoffman had failed to exercise proper care around major blood vessels, directly causing the arterial damage that resulted in Chandler's fatal hemorrhaging. This legal action marked the first public challenge to the sanitized version of events surrounding Chandler's death. Despite the severe allegations and Chandler's high profile, the suit attracted astonishingly scant media attention. Major entertainment publications either ignored the story outright or relegated it to back pages with few details, in stark contrast to the blanket coverage that normally greets any news involving a star of his magnitude. Industry sources from the time said Universal Pictures, anxious to protect their investment in Chandler's image, leveraged its legal and public relations machinery to squelch publicity of the lawsuit. The case was eventually settled out of court at the end of 1962, about a year after Chandler's death. Terms were sealed, and the amount of compensation or even specific acknowledgments of fault would not be publicly released. The agreement guaranteed that the most damning details of Chandler's medical care were left in secret, and neither the doctor nor the hospital was found guilty. Rumors pegged the settlement in the high six figures, an extraordinary award for the time against medical malpractice and indicating grave negligence. The settlement served several functions. Chandler's family had been compensated. Dr. Hoffman and his hospital were shielded from public scrutiny. Universal Pictures could maintain the commercial viability of the films of Chandler. Equally important, the case could not have established a precedent that might embolden greater oversight over medical care provided to other Hollywood stars. This coordinated effort to minimize visibility demonstrates something of the power of Hollywood in times past to shape stories and control public perception, effectively turning a case of apparent medical negligence into a minor, unobtrusive part of Chandler's life. Besides the initial surgical mistake, there is evidence of further significant hospital failures contributing to the death of Chandler. These failures turned what could have been a recoverable injury into a lethal cascade of complications. Various accounts, including those from two nurses at Culver City Hospital, indicated that Chandler's initial hemorrhaging should have been survivable if proper emergency response was instituted. The key to control of arterial bleeding is immediate blood transfusions and a ready team, neither of which was apparently in place during the early hours of Chandler's crisis. One nurse, who asked not to be identified, said, "He walked in for a back problem. He never walked out." This emphasizes how common a procedure turned into a lethal outcome due to avoidable mistakes. The hospital's alleged failures included inadequate preparation of blood supplies and the absence of a fully staffed transfusion team, critical resources for any major surgery near major blood vessels. Delays in providing transfusions reportedly allowed Chandler's condition to deteriorate from serious, but manageable to critical and eventually irreversible. Problems with cross-matching blood types and ensuring compatibility may have further complicated treatment, introducing additional risks. Furthermore, the surgical team did not immediately have access to vascular specialists who might have repaired the arterial damage more effectively during the earliest stages of the crisis. These systemic failures went unreported due to the sealed malpractice settlement. Had the case gone to trial, these deficiencies could have been examined publicly, possibly revealing serious lapses in the hospital's emergency protocols. The confidential resolution not only prevented accountability, but protected the industry from scrutiny and potential reforms that could have saved future patients. A pattern of institutional failure followed by intentional concealment indicates a disturbing reality related to medical care for the stars of Hollywood during that time. While celebrities often received preferential treatment in regard to comfort and privacy, at times the management of publicity and protection of reputations compromised quality and transparency of care. This dynamic, in the case of Chandler, might have contributed not only to his death, but also to the erasure of its preventable nature from public memory. One of the most persistent but seldom discussed aspects of Jeff Chandler's life involves rumors regarding his private preferences, specifically allegations that he enjoyed cross-dressing in women's clothing. While today such personal choices would be considered far less sensational, in the rigidly conformist entertainment industry of the 1950s, even rumors of this behavior could be career-ending for a male star, particularly one known for hypermasculine roles. For the most part, these rumors remained in the realm of Hollywood gossip until after Chandler's death, when they received unexpected public confirmation from an unlikely source. Esther Williams, the swimming champion turned actress, had briefly dated Chandler in the mid-1950s. In her 1999 autobiography, The $1 Million Mermaid, she claimed to have discovered Chandler's penchant for wearing women's clothing during their relationship. According to Williams, she once arrived unexpectedly at Chandler's apartment and found him dressed in a red wig, high heels, and a flowered chiffon dress. This revelation reportedly ended their relationship, as she found it incompatible with her expectations for a romantic partner. Decades after Chandler's death, Williams' account brought the previously whispered aspect of his life into public discussion, when he could no longer confirm nor deny it. Knowledge of his private preference may have affected his standing in the years leading up to his fatal surgery. Several industry insiders from that era noted that rumors about Chandler's cross-dressing had begun to circulate within Hollywood circles before Williams' public confirmation, potentially reaching the studio executives and casting directors that controlled his career opportunities. He played warriors and cowboys, but Hollywood wouldn't tolerate a man who wore silk at home, said one casting director. This tension between his public image and the realities of his personal identity rises from the contradiction between his on-screen persona and the truth of his private life. Evidence demonstrates these rumors may have started to impact Chandler's career trajectory in the late 1950s. Having enjoyed a steady rise throughout the early and mid-1950s, the quality and prominence of his roles began to decrease around 1959 to 1960. While still working regularly, he was increasingly being assigned less prestigious projects, with fewer opportunities for significant leading roles. Observers noted a growing reluctance among industry decision-makers to position him prominently, possibly due to concerns that rumors about his private life could become public. The psychological impact on Chandler appears to have been significant. Friends and colleagues reported increasing anxiety and stress in the year before his surgery, preoccupations over career prospects and financial security not characteristic earlier. This heightened stress likely contributed both to his physical health problems and potentially to his resilience during the subsequent medical crisis. Some have suggested the strain of maintaining his public image, while fearing exposure of his private life, created a psychological burden that may have affected his ability to recover during prolonged hospitalization. While impossible to prove definitively, this theory certainly aligns with medical understanding of how psychological factors can influence recovery from physical trauma. Throughout his career, Universal Pictures kept its contract stars on a punishing production schedule, requiring their fullest physical exertion with little regard for their future health and well-being. The back problems stemming from his often heavy workload created the necessity for the fatal surgery. During the period from the early 1950s to 1961, he appeared in up to 5 films annually, including many that relied on physically taxing stunts, horseback riding, and fight scenes. Witnesses described him arriving on the set in obvious pain, at times relying on medication to get through scenes. Rather than modify schedules or diminish the physical demands on Chandler, however, Universal leaned on him to continue performing as if nothing were wrong, valuing their production schedule over their stars' health. This was a general pattern in the studio system, since stars were little more than capital assets. In the case of Chandler, whose appeal had been rooted in a projection of strength and vigor, this meant that physical limitations were to be downplayed, and the culture was one in which injuries were concealed and pain suffered silently. Universal's exploitative approach extended into Chandler's hospitalization when, while the studio issued statements of concern and support, its executives began to recast his projects within days of his surgery, at a time when no one could have reasonably assumed he would not recover. Demonstrated through this example was the studio's prioritization of financial interests over loyalty to an injured star. Universal's public statements after Chandler's death were obligatory but restrained, and the studio made no attempt to maintain his cultural presence with retrospectives or film reissues, as is standard practice for stars whom a studio perceives as integral to its legacy. These omissions hastened his eclipse from public memory. The pattern of exploitation followed by abandonment underscores the transactional nature of the studio system. Extract maximum value, while capable minimal investment in well-being, and swift distancing once the star is no longer commercially viable. Taken together, all these aspects of Chandler's story weave a deeply disturbing pattern. His fatal surgery was not simply a regrettable accident, but the culmination of a system that had exploited him physically, failed him medically, and subsequently covered up the truth. The surgical error that initiated his final crisis occurred in a body already weakened by years of studio overwork. Hospital failures prevented what should have been a survivable complication from being properly treated. Rumors about his private life may have weakened his psychological resilience. Throughout it all, the studio put protecting its investments ahead of supporting Chandler. Minimal press coverage, sealed settlements, and studio-controlled narratives finally suppressed the full truth, which fed a sanitized version of events for decades. Jeff Chandler's story is more than the tragic death of a Hollywood star. It is a testament to a system that valued image over truth, profit over people, and institutional protection over accountability. The real mystery is not how Chandler died, but how successfully this preventable tragedy was hidden, transforming it into a footnote rather than the scandal it should have been. Understanding the complete truth honors both his memory and the need to question the sanitized narratives of Hollywood's golden age, which often mask far darker realities of how the industry treated its stars.